Hi, this is Dirk TD, the author and creator of the graphic novel series Paradigm Shift, and now the director of a new animated short called Restless Sleep, which will be coming out very soon. So, this is a tutorial on how I made my character Kate into a transformable character rig in Blender. So I started off with a character here from DAZ Studio. This is the Genesis 8 female model. This is basically a direct object OBG wavefront object export out of DAZ Studio. The way I set this up initially was I tested everything out in DAZ Studio because I didn't know Blender very well. But I'm going to demo all this in Blender because all the work basically happened in Blender. I was just testing things out and using the model rig from DAZ Studio. And I'll give you links to tutorials on some of how the nitty gritty of that stuff works because I'm not going to go into detail here. I'm mostly just going to do an overview on how I made this character turn into a werewolf and made it so I can actually animate with it instead of just having like a static transformation. So this is the base model. I did not model this. This is all from DAZ Studio. They did all the work here. But the concept was that in order to make this work, you can create morphs. You can have the model change shape. And the way I made this model work was to just move all the points around to have her change from a human shape into this werewolf shape. But instead of going straight from human to werewolf, there's some transition states in between here. So I'll turn those on so you can see. Whoa. I don't know what happened there. You can go away. So first we had the human. Actually, then we had a feral human. So basically this is the same model except with some added pointed ears and nails and toenails. And then also the teeth are also pointed inside like this. Mildly, but they do the job. So then from there, then we have this sort of half wolf form. And the way this happened was literally by moving all the points around and keeping the points of anatomy the same. So from the nose, the tip of the nose lines up with the tip of the nose in the human form. The nostrils line up, the sides of the nose line up. I tried to keep everything as close to anatomically correct between a human and a canine as possible because they have there's the same number of bones more or less. They line up, they're just different sizes and shapes, but they're the same number of bones. So the same with like the feet. There's some werewolf designs where they try to turn the knees inside out, but that's wrong. It's confusing the knees with the ankles. They're just longer feet, up on their toes. The biggest changes probably on this model are in the feet, because here I have got the big toe basically in the same place as it was when she was in human form, and then have the other toes sticking out and becoming more paw-like. And then the final form, here we have our full werewolf. And in here, the biggest changes happen, and here's where things actually change proportion. So the body gets longer, the arms get longer, the legs stay basically about the same length. The feet get a little longer, and then the neck gets longer. And so this required changing the actual armature, the rig underneath. So there's actually two separate rigs for this character. There's the human, and the human can basically turn all the way to the half form, and then that can go a little bit further. I can stretch it a little bit further, and then I have to hand it off to another rig to become the full-on werewolf. So you can see this thing in action here in the editing mode. So if I say select the nose, let's see, nose, we'll select the nose. And if I drag on this slider, you can see that you have to like keep all the vertices lined up so they match between the forms. That's the first thing. And the other thing was to actually reference real things. Now, I'm not showing. I'll show this when I cut away. That half of the trick was knowing what I wanted the in between forms to look like, and I'd already worked that out because I designed this werewolf transformation for my comic. And if you happen to have read my art book, you'll see all the sketches that went into the multiple variations and iterations on getting that werewolf transformation correct. It all sort of hinges on this half form to basically take care of all the big changes from human to wolf. Kind of that all happens sort of in this half form, and then the full-on werewolf is just sort of like making all this stuff bigger and more beastly. So this is sort of the key form. Once I got this going, the rest of it was pretty easy. Now let me hide the mouth. Oh, there's still more mouth. And you can see, well, some of the stuff get cut away. But, you know, you had to change all the teeth to match. So if I drag that down there, you can kind of see those transform too. And then the other thing I made sure to do, because at the time I wasn't quite sure about how to rig anything. This is why I was using DAZ, because I didn't know how to rig anything. So as I left the eyeballs in the same place so they would line up. Later on I figured out how to move bones around and tweak stuff, so that didn't matter so much. But that was one of the limitations I ran into at this first stage, was to like leave the eyes in the same place so the eyes would continue to work. For the initial transformable thing, you have to like keep everything in the same place for the rig to work. And if you noticed, I've got a change in size a little bit between the human and the half-wolf form there, which I had to undo later on and create sort of like a fix. I had to create a fixed shape key to have the wolf form shape be the same basic proportions as the human shape, and then take care of all the limb and body transformations just by stretching and squashing the bones. And I'll show how that works in a moment. So that's sort of the basic overview of the process that went into creating these forms. Now I'll show kind of how it works in practice. I'll turn on the actual rigs here. And turn on some textures. So there we go. And let me turn off a couple of extra bits that we don't need. So here's the final character rig. And this was exported. The basic rig and character was exported out of DAZ using the DAZ to Blender bridge, which spits out a pretty basic armature, which I've done a few modifications to make it a little bit more user-friendly. And this is what I used to animate. Well, actually, this is sort of like an updated version. But more or less, this is what I used to animate all of Restless Sleep. It was this armature and a minus a couple of the add-ons that I've recently been playing with. It's got basic IK and forward K, but it's missing a lot of the stuff that Rigify has. Anyway, but that's kind of not the point here. The point is that I can demo the transformation on there, and you can kind of see on the timeline if I select all these and then go away, go away, go away. There, hide all the bones so you can just see the controls. So there's a number of morphs that are happening here. So first off, you'll notice that the basis changed because I added an anime more on model version of my character here. Oh wait, I must have a control for that. But yeah, anime Kate head. So if I get rid of that, then she turns back and looks really strange with the base DAZ model. But there it is. And then here's the anime head, which is kind of essential to make the character look like the character, but that's okay. So then you see here on the side, there's all these transformation controls. There's the main ones like feral. So this is what gives her ears. I'll zoom in. So this gives her ears. But it also drives the teeth. So if I were to open up her mouth, little pointy teeth in there, although they get bigger. Oh, that's also kind of out of place. Whatever. It works in the main model. I had to cobble this one together so I could demo everything. All right. So that's the first one, but then I've got a few other things that happen in this sort of first transition form. There it is. Let me turn that off, and I'll just use the slide. I'll use the timeline slider to change. Where's the half form? About there. Yes, there we are. But so what's happening during this transition? You'll notice that the this half form isn't quite the same as the half form over here, because I've done some squashing and stretching using the bones of the model. So if I look at the spine here, her spine actually stretches a bit and actually moves up. You can kind of see it here. Oh, right. It's this lower abdomen bone. It actually moves. It actually goes higher. And her shoulders get wider, and the chest. All those bones are changing size. So you can see I'm going from, in the scale, I'm changing the scale of the bone to make that happen. So this works pretty well. I can even move the facial controls around, even though her mouth becomes a snout. There's a few things that kind of start getting a little funky, but since most of the pose bones in the face are just, they're not really rotation based, they're just movement based, I can move the mouth around and the eyes and all that, and it works pretty well. Ears, all that works. The main stuff that started breaking if the sizes didn't line up were the fingers. Like if I've tried to move her hand, then the fingers would start going all weird. Actually, I can demonstrate that. If I switch over here, I've got a fix. Where's the fix? Hands fix. Hands fix. So this was the old version. Where is feet fix? Feet fix, torso fix. that's... Well, anyway, this will demonstrate it. So if I try to like move the hands, it would... it isn't bad, but there was a version where they would sort of like go and kind of get spaghettified if I went too big with it. Even so, they start looking a little strange. They didn't quite line up, so I moved the model around to fix that. And same with the feet. So and that was just sort of pushing and pulling and using the in the edit mode to get everything lined up. Also, there's this other model. There's a tail, which also it doesn't quite line up with the... I need to adjust the keyframes on the underwear to have that match, but that's easily fixed. It's correct in the actual movies. And these are also done with keyframes, but they're keyframes on in this version. They're on the armature. In the movie, they're all keyed to the shape keys. But there's just a couple of morphs over here. There's sort of like there's no tail at all, and then there's sort of a stub, and then a small tail, and then these larger tails, and then there's a second model, which is the fur, which I had to hand model all that stuff. It's not perfect, but it gets the job done, especially in the cell shaded mode. Which actually, let's switch over to that, and you can see the textures, because the textures change here. This is another reason why I wanted to do this in Blender, because, well, for one thing, you can't do cell shading in DAZ very easily. There are a couple plugins, but it just doesn't look like my art style, nor does it look like full-on anime. Blender does a much better job with that, and there's just so many more controls over animation. But the main thing is you can't animate textures at all in DAZ. For those of you who saw the kind of human transformation test, that was all done in DAZ, but I actually had to do multiple render passes. I had to do one with the human skin, and then a second one with the werewolf texture, and then I had to just blend between them in After Effects afterwards in post. All right, so here we have the model. Oh, of course, it's got to compile the textures between. So this will take a second. Come on. All right, so there's her human skin, and there's a little in the textures. Here, I'll show you the texture sheet. There's a shader. Let me put it on her face. And I'm just swapping between a human texture map and then a wolf texture map. And they're being driven by a property in the armature, but it's just a mix node. And it as she approaches half wolf, here I'll let it load up the halfway form here. So you see it just sort of fades in, and then there's a second effect that's happening where I add in like the lines that are put a little detail on her fur. Of course, it doesn't render smoothly in the viewport, but it renders smoothly for the animation. So you can kind of see if I were to turn off this node, then let me change to her torso. It'd be more visible there. So that is controlling the detail of her fur. So each of the texture slots on the model have all that, and it's all linked up to a slider over here on the model, or on the armature. So I've got all this set up. Fur lines, here it is. I can just turn that on and off. And by putting in a property like this, then I can just change it in one place and it changes all over the model, the model, as opposed to having to go in one by one in the texture and change the keyframes on that. So that's like the first half of the first half of the transformation. And then as she goes closer to her, what I call the full beast mode, she can get about this far. And at this point, like, I can still do the hands and things more or less work fine. But anything beyond this, the model just started to getting way too distorted. So this is where we switch over to the other rig, which can shrink to match this one. So they're basically the same. They're not 100% of the same, but they're pretty close. And in the tests, I was able to match them up almost between frames, so I can swap them out between frames and you can't really tell. It's pretty close, but it's not 100%, but it's close enough for my purposes. And then this one continues, and then this is the actual model without any of the bones being stretched. This is sort of the natural default. And then as you can see, I've got this other mesh set up with the fur, and that's animatable as well. I've got a number of keyframes here, like this one called fluffed, which kind of pokes all the fur out. So when it's growing out, it kind of looks like it's like puffed up like a cat's tail, and then it smooths out as she finishes the transformation. This is all rigged up. She's got teeth and face, and the eyes work, and also I didn't show this on the other character, but even the hair is rigged. There we go. Yeah, so there's the hair, and these are all just set up in IK chains, so I can move the various bits of hair around. It's pretty standard from what I can tell for animators. I mean, some people like to do physics simulations on these, but I didn't want to deal with that. That's why I just hand animated it using IK chains and a little bit of forward FK certain shots to make it a little smoother. One other holdover I have in here is, here's the texture for the realistic one, and if anyone's interested in how that was made, this was all basically just a photo collage in Photoshop. If you look real closely, you can kind of see the seams because I didn't have a way of doing that in 3D. I basically just had to eyeball it in Photoshop. And all this fur basically came from every single possible piece of wolf reference I could find, and I just would grab chunks. I guess I could open that up in Photoshop. If I go to the textures, click on an object. Oh, no, get out of pose mode. Click on an object. Click on torso. We'll just go to the torso, and oh, I suppose I need the image viewer. Yeah, here we are. And we will open that up in Photoshop. All right, so here's an example of the texture map in Photoshop. It's kind of complicated. So what I started with was doing a really rough drawing of what the shapes I wanted for the fur, using Blender's. Actually, no, was this even in Blender? No, this is before I figured out how to do texture painting in Blender. So this was actually just hand drawn in Photoshop, kind of lining up using I just used the mesh UV map as a guide of where all the polygons were going to be, and kind of just drew in a rough shape of where I wanted stuff to go. And then the texture is just multiple layers of wolf fur taken from various photographs gotten from everywhere. So I guess technically I don't own this stuff. Unless this falls enough under fair use because I've transformed it enough. Ideally, I suppose if I were to sell, if I were to like turn this into a sellable model or something, I would have to go in and purchase a bunch of stock and recreate this using stock. So yeah, this is just a big old photo collage. Just trying to line and just using this drawing as or this quick painting as a guide. I mostly just did this for fun. It wasn't really because I knew if I at the time I didn't know I was going to make a movie, but I did know that I would eventually want to make an anime version of that matched my comic character. So anyway, I guess I'll throw links in the description for the various tutorials that I use to figure out sort of the technical steps towards building this model. And I'll also throw you some links to some of the reference art that, well, I guess it's concept art because it's stuff that I drew for the actual design of the transformation that I used based on the work that I did for the comic. So then that should be about it. I can't teach you how to model. I can't teach you how to draw. Well, at least not in this one tutorial. But hopefully that gives you an idea of how this thing worked. And I'll be happy to answer questions in the comments. And I've been on Twitter lately, so I guess if you can find me on Twitter and ask questions there too. I'll put a link for that in the description as well. All right, so thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this. I also hope that you'll check out my film, Restless Sleep, which will be coming out probably in the next month or so right here on this YouTube channel. And I hope you'll subscribe. So thank you for watching.